There is a dimension of naval warfare that never appears in photographs. It has no visible surface, no horizon, no weather. It exists in darkness, so complete and so absolute that light itself becomes irrelevant, replaced by sound, by pressure differentials, by the patient analysis of acoustic signatures traveling through water at 1,500 meters per second. It is the underwater dimension. And in the South China Sea, in the spring of a year that the analysts in Pearl Harbor had already designated as elevated in risk, that dimension had become the most contested space in the world's most contested body of water. The South China Sea is not merely a geographic feature, it is a claim, or rather, it is the object of a claim. Beijing's assertion, embodied in the 9-dash line drawn on Chinese maps and rejected by an international tribunal in 2016, and ignored by China ever since, that the majority of this sea belongs to China, not the surface only, not the airspace, everything, the fish, the hydrocarbons, the shipping lanes, the seabed, and beneath the seabed, in the deep basins that drop to 4,000 meters in places, the acoustic environment that submarines exploit when they need to move undetected. China has invested enormously in both the submarines that move through that environment and in the sensors designed to deny it to others. The result is a three-dimensional chess game played in permanent darkness, with stakes measured in strategic access and operational deterrence, by crews who train for years to develop the particular combination of patience, precision, and controlled aggression that subsurface warfare demands. On a Tuesday morning, the time was 2:14 local. The surface of the South China Sea was calm, sea state 2, a light wind from the northeast, the sky overcast and moonless. A United States Navy carrier strike group was operating in international waters approximately 180 nautical miles east of the Paracel Islands, conducting scheduled flight operations in support of a regional deterrence mission. The carrier's flight deck was active. Night operations, the thunder of catapult launches and arrested landings providing a rhythm that vibrated through the ship's entire structure. On the surface, the strike group's escorting destroyers and cruiser held their screening positions, their radar systems painting the surrounding ocean in continuous sweeps. Everything on the surface picture was nominal. Beneath the surface, something was not. The nuclear-powered attack submarine, assigned as the strike group's undersea escort, had been operating in a standard defensive patrol pattern approximately 15 miles ahead of the carrier's track when its passive sonar operators detected an anomaly at 1:47. The anomaly was subtle, a faint tonal, at a frequency that did not match any biologics in the library, that was not consistent with flow noise from the carrier group's own vessels, and that had a Doppler characteristic suggesting a contact moving at low speed on a course roughly parallel to the carrier's own track. The sonar supervisor pulled the trace and looked at it for 4 minutes before he said anything. When he said something, he said it quietly to the officer of the deck. The officer of the deck made a phone call. By 2:09, the contact had been elevated to a classification datum, not confirmed, not positive, but sufficient to trigger the standard escalation protocol for potential subsurface contacts in direct proximity to a carrier. By 2:14, when the carrier's Combat Information Center watch officer was first informed, the attack submarine had already begun a deliberate counter-detection maneuver. A slow turn designed to bring different sections of her hydrophone array to bear on the contact bearing and refine the acoustic picture. The watch officer in the carrier's CIC absorbed the initial report with the particular stillness of someone who has prepared for this moment in training so many times that the preparation has become instinct. He keyed the internal circuit. Captain, CIC. Possible subsurface contact. Datum from escort submarine. Bearing approximately 275 relative. Classification in progress. Request your presence. The captain arrived in the CIC at 2:17. She was fully dressed. Captains of carriers in high-tension operating areas do not sleep in the way that civilians sleep. They rest with one part of their mind always oriented toward the ship's status, always available to surface at the first call. She studied the ASW picture on the dedicated display, reviewing the acoustic data that had been transmitted from the escort submarine and was now being processed by the carrier's own ASW coordination team. The tonal was there, faint, but there. And as she watched, the sonar operators on the escort submarine were refining their analysis, running the acoustic trace against the classification library, comparing blade rates, comparing tonals, comparing the specific harmonic signature that each class of submarine generates from its propulsion machinery and machinery spaces like a fingerprint. At 2:23, the escort submarine transmitted a flash message to the carrier's ASW coordinator. The classification read, possible plan type 093B, Shang class nuclear attack submarine. Confidence level moderate. Contact bearing 273. Range estimate 8 to 12,000 yards. Course estimate 055. Speed estimate 3 to 5 knots. 8 to 12,000 yards. That was 4.5 to 6 nautical miles. A Chinese nuclear attack submarine, if the classification was correct, was operating at low speed on a course that placed it inside the carrier strike group's defensive perimeter. Not merely in the general area, not trailing at a safe distance, but inside. The Shang-class type 093B was China's most capable nuclear attack submarine, equipped with YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles, with a range sufficient to threaten the carrier from well within the datum range. This was not a surveillance contact. This was a penetration of the strike group's inner defensive zone. The captain looked at the display for a long, steady moment. "All right," she said. "Let's be precise. This is a classification datum at moderate confidence. We do not have a confirmed contact. We will not act as though we have a confirmed contact until we do. What is the P8 status?" P8 is 40 minutes out, ma'am. We can have it overhead the datum area in 42 minutes. Or get it moving. I want it on scene without advertising. What else do we have available? 2 MH-60Rs are on alert 5. We can have them airborne in under 10 minutes. Hold them on deck. I don't want to show our hand before the P8 gets a picture. She turned to the escort submarine's communication link. Tell the escort to continue prosecution. Passive only for now. I want a refined position before we do anything visible. This was the discipline of deep professional expertise applied to a situation where the instinct to act immediately had to be subordinated to the intelligence value of waiting. Every action the strike group took to prosecute the contact would be detectable, The moment helicopter rotors started turning, the moment active sonar pulsed, the moment any platform in the strike group deviated from its standard pattern, the Chinese submarine, if it was out there, would know it had been detected. And a submarine that knows it has been detected has options. It can evade, it can go deeper. It can attempt to open the range before prosecution can localize it precisely. The longer the strike group could maintain the appearance of routine operations while building its acoustic picture, the better the final prosecution would be. The carrier maintained her flight operations. The catapults continued launching. The arresting gear continued catching. On every display in the CIC, the surface picture remained normal. Beneath the surface, invisible to everything except the patient acoustic sensors of the escort submarine. The prosecution continued. The geometry tightens, even in water 4,000 meters deep. At 2:38, the escort submarine transmitted an updated contact report. The confidence level had risen from moderate to high. The blade count analysis had produced a match against the Type 093B profile at 91% correlation. The contact's course had refined to 060, its speed to 4 knots. Its range had closed to approximately 7,000 yards from the escort submarine, which placed it at an estimated 5 nautical miles from the carrier's current position. On its current course, and at current speed, the contact would pass abeam the carrier at a distance of approximately 3 nautical miles within the next 60 minutes, unless it altered course. 3 nautical miles. In submarine warfare terms, that was point-blank range for a submarine armed with YJ-18 cruise missiles with a range of 500 kilometers. This was no longer a datum. This was a contact, and the contact was inside the wire. At 2:41, the captain made her decision. Launch both Seahawks, ASW configuration. I want them on the datum bearing within 6 minutes. Passive sensors first, dipping sonar, no active. They are to localize the contact and hold it. No active sonar until I give the order. She paused. And get me the escort submarine CO on the voice circuit. The conversation with the escort submarine's commanding officer lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. It was a professional, precise exchange between 2 experienced submariners, one in a carrier's CIC, one 300 feet below the surface of the South China Sea, coordinating the prosecution of a contact that both of them now believed to be real. The escort submarine would maneuver to a position that placed it between the contact and the carrier, establishing a blocking geometry. The Seahawks would prosecute from above with dipping sonar. Together, they would build a localization picture precise enough to make the Chinese submarine's position known to it, which was the point. Not to destroy, to reveal, to demonstrate that the invisible had become visible and that the invisible had been visible for far longer than the Chinese commander would find comfortable. At sea, distance is language. But in anti-submarine warfare, detection itself is the message. The 2 MH-60R Seahawks were airborne at 0247 and proceeded to the datum area at low altitude, their navigation lights dark, their acoustic sensors deploying within minutes of arrival on station. The first dipping sonar contact, an active return from the Seahawks AQS-22 sonar system, came at 0304. The return was unambiguous, hard, distinct, the shape of a large submarine hull, at a depth of approximately 140 meters, bearing 071 from the datum, range 4,200 yards. The contact was localized. Position confirmed. The type 093B, if that was what it was, and the acoustic evidence now said it almost certainly was sitting at 140 meters depth, 4,000 yards from the datum, on a course that was taking it slowly away from the carrier's track. It had heard the dipping sonar. It knew it had been found. In the CIC, the ASW coordinator reported the confirmed contact position to the captain with the same flat professionalism that characterized every exchange in that room. The captain looked at the localized position on the display. She looked at the geometry between the contact and the carrier. She looked at the escort submarine's position, now maneuvering to the blocking geometry. She looked at the P8, now 20 minutes out and closing. Transmit the contact position to the escort submarine. Confirm they have the same datum. She waited 4 seconds for the confirmation. Good. Now transmit on the Gertrude. The Gertrude, the underwater telephone system, broadcast on the frequency that all submarines monitoring these waters would receive. The message was brief. It was transmitted in English. Unidentified submarine. You are operating in close proximity to United States naval forces. You have been localized by multiple acoustic systems. Your position is known. This encounter is being documented and reported to United States Pacific Fleet. We recommend you alter course to open range from this formation. The message was not a threat. It was information, delivered with the calm certainty of a force that had nothing to prove and no reason to pretend otherwise. The Chinese submarine commander now knew 3 things simultaneously: that he had been detected, that his position was known with precision, and that the detection had been thorough enough and early enough that it had been his adversary's choice, not his own movement, that had determined when and how the localization occurred. That knowledge, in the psychology of submarine warfare, is its own form of defeat. At 3:11, the contact began to maneuver. The speed increased from 4 knots to 9, a significant acoustic signature change that the escort submarine and both Seahawks tracked easily. The course changed from 060 to 140, south-southeast, away from the carrier's track, away from the formation, toward deeper water where the acoustic conditions favored evasion over prosecution. It was leaving. In the CIC, the captain watched the contact track update in real time as the submarine opened range. She watched it for 4 minutes before she spoke. Continue tracking until it's outside 20 miles. P8 will maintain the datum. I want the full acoustic record, every tonal, every blade count, every dipping sonar return, packaged for Pacific Fleet intelligence within 2 hours. The escort submarine CO gets a personal communication from me before end of watch. She looked at the ASW coordinator. How long were we tracking before they knew we had them? Best estimate 47 minutes from initial datum, ma'am. She nodded once. That was the number that mattered. 47 minutes of silent, invisible prosecution before the contact knew it had been found. 47 minutes during which the strike group had built a picture so complete and so precise that when the moment came to reveal the detection, there was no ambiguity, no room for the Chinese side to claim the encounter had been different from what it was. The P-8 arrived on station at 0319 and assumed prosecution responsibility, releasing the Seahawks to return to the carrier. By 3:44, the contact was 22 miles from the carrier's position and still opening. By 4:30, it was outside effective prosecution range, and the formal tracking was handed off to a Virginia-class submarine that Pacific Fleet had repositioned for exactly this contingency. The carrier's flight operations continued without interruption throughout the entire event. To any observer watching from the surface or from space, the strike group had conducted a routine night of flight operations in international waters. Nothing had changed. Nothing had appeared to happen. Beneath the surface, everything had happened. What had been tested on this Tuesday morning was not primarily weapons or platforms or sensor ranges, though all of those had performed exactly as designed. What had been tested was the doctrine, the training, and the quiet institutional discipline that allows a naval force to detect a threat at its most dangerous point, inside the defensive perimeter, at close range, in the darkness, and respond to it with complete control. No panic, no escalation beyond what the situation required, no action that could be characterized as aggressive or provocative, only the steady professional application of capability, applied precisely, documented completely, and communicated to the adversary in terms that left no room for misunderstanding. The South China Sea will always be contested. The acoustic environment beneath its surface will always be a battleground of a kind that the public rarely sees and rarely thinks about. Chinese submarines will continue to probe, to penetrate, to test the defensive architecture of American carrier operations in these waters. That is the nature of the competition. It does not stop. It does not pause. It continues in the darkness, at 4 knots, at 140 meters depth, in a silence broken only by the faint harmonics of machinery and the patient sweep of hydrophone arrays. What determines the outcome of that competition is not which side has more submarines or newer sensors, though those things matter enormously. What determines the outcome is which side's crews are better trained, more patient, more precise, more capable of maintaining the discipline required to exploit a detection before revealing it, better at the long, quiet, unglamorous work of being very good at something that no one will ever see. On this Tuesday morning in the South China Sea, at a depth of 140 meters and a range of 4,200 yards, the answer to that question had been demonstrated as clearly as the acoustic signature of a Shang-class nuclear submarine resolving itself out of the background noise of the deep ocean. The answer was clear. It was documented, and it was already on its way to Pearl Harbor.